stop whatever you're doing, focus on this, and create something awesome.
This is it. This is what we're doing for the rest of forever.
Flying room, guns, let's go.
Well, so we're here today at the Developer Showcase for the Vive in Seattle, and going to talk to some of the developers who've making the content here today. So if you guys could just tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, your company, and what game you're working on, a little description, that'd be great.
I'm Denny Unger, the CEO and creative director at Cloudhead Games. We're building an experience called the Gallery 6 Elements, and it's kind of like a Goonies 80s adventure with puzzle solving and exploration.
All right, I'm Dirk from iLusions. We're creating Space Pirate Trainer, which is kind of a combination between Max Payne and Space Invaders and Galaga.
My name is Patrick Hackett. I work at Google, and I'm working on Tilt Brush, which is a virtual reality painting application.
My name is Alex Schwartz, and I run Alchemy Labs. I'm the chief scientist and janitor of the company. And we're working on Job Simulator, which is a historical recreation of the past when humans actually had jobs.
I'm Alex Knoll. I'm the lead designer at Stress Level Zero, and we're making Hover Junkers, which is a first-person shooter, flying platform, realistic airsoft simulation game.
I'm John Nagel. I'm the CTO of Phaser Lock Interactive, and we're making Final Approach. And I best describe it as when you were kids and you were playing with toy airplanes and pretending you were in a different world playing with your toys. That's Final Approach.
I know a couple of you guys have been working on VR for a while now. And what have you progressed and kind of changed as the hardware has changed? Like, how has that affected your development?
Well, it kind of went in incremental steps, right? So like Palmer Luckey and the DK1 for Oculus gave us rotational tracking and an okay display, and it just kind of leveled up from there with positional tracking. And then we were using Razer Hydra as kind of like a surrogate to do hand interactions at the time, and that actually worked really well. It was there was latency and all the kind of associated problems with that, but it gave us kind of a window into what might be possible with using your hands in a VR context. And then things kept changing, and Vive came along, and we suddenly have access to a full room scale positional tracking system. And with each kind of incremental step, we had to kind of reinvent what we were building to really suit that experience. So just having access to that massive space to actually track somebody moving around opened up all kinds of new opportunities, and it just kind of fundamentally changed certain concepts. And it's really interesting because we can kind of look at that high-level VR experience and see that as kind of like the goal. And for every platform, we can kind of step it down to whatever meets that, But having that high-end VR experience is super important to us, just to know what that kind of established benchmark is for what we can do in the space.
It's funny, as we were doing prototypes through those years, like with the different VR platforms, this is even independent of Tilt Brush, we were learning best practices that quickly got wiped away.
Exactly.
At one point, I had a movement solution for VR that didn't have position tracking. So just rotation, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and then we got like our Oculus DK2s, and I was like, well, I don't get to use that on anything.
Anyone else have that transition? Because I remember, the first time I played Tilt Brush, I had to move my head, hit my angle that I was going to paint on, and then I would paint on it.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
The first version of Tilt Brush started with the Oculus Rift DK2, and we were dead set on shipping the application. Like, we wanted to sell it, we wanted to get out of the demo space, we wanted a retail product, but we didn't have access to any position track controllers. And there was a lot of people using Hydras, but Hydras, I think they were discontinued at that time, and it was this weird thing where we didn't want to target a third-party controller. And so we made it work with keyboard and mouse. We saw it as like the lowest common denominator, and it was it was clunky, and we referred to it as like finger jumping jacks because you had to, do all these different things. But it showed off like the product. It showed it really well. And so we were talking about this earlier, the transition to room scale for Tilt Brush. The first time we hooked up like the pointer element to the controller and created a stroke in midair was like, oh, we have to redo everything. It was like, oh my God, we actually have to rethink the way that all of our UI works. Yeah, it was good problems to have, but that was an eye-opening experience.
That moment was basically like that. The Fiducial Trek, VR room was almost like that, but on a company level. We're like, this is it. This is what we're doing for the rest of forever.
Yeah.
And we came out of that demo and we're just like, all right, that was a near religious epiphany of how VR could be. But I was actually kind of sad after I got out of the room. I don't know about anyone else, because I was like, this is still the realm of academia or research, and I don't know if this is ever going to be productized. And seeing that
exactly
that it was actually going to become a thing.
We actually asked Chet that when we first went through the FID room, and we were like, it's cool, but where's it going to go? Tried the FID room, and we're like, you guys have to make this. And Chet at the time, we were like, I don't know if it's going to be a consumer product for at least another decade. And I was like, it's like all these ideas that I instantly just came up with are just, and then the second that we heard about a consumer product that would have room scale with track controllers, we're like, let's go,
So we had the benefit of having seen the Vive as our basically our first foray into modern VR. We knew we wanted to target the Vive, right out of the box, but we didn't have one obviously at that point. And so we started also with the Oculus and the Hydra controllers. On the rare occasions when the Hydras were tracking perfectly, we could see kind of like what the potential was. It was functional, but it was not the fulfillment of the vision that we had for the product. So when we actually got the Vive, it's like, okay, now the hardware is out of the way. Now we can focus on the experience.
That's the biggest shift with the hardware and how it's changed is for a long time, I think all of us thought that we were going to have to kind of target a seated 180-degree kind of experience where, you have to figure out the control mechanism for just that forward momentum, and nothing would break that, right? We had developed something called VR Comfort Mode, which allowed you to do these snap turns to get rid of vection and vestibular disconnect when you're rotating. It was kind of like a dancer spotting and always picking their spot, right? To prevent dizziness. But the second that room scale was an actual thing, we could see where that was going, everything changed, because the less you limit the user in that experience, the less you run into issues with nausea and everything else.
Well, it's just you could remove all the hacks that people were trying to put in place to solve various issues. We read about if you put a fake nose there, you get less nausea. And it's no, you don't need to do any of these things. We don't need to solve a set of problems. And it's funny, even with design, people ask how would you do this in VR? What's the button for crouch? And it's no, you just do it.
Exactly.
So we're removing just all these elements of things you have to think about, and it's kind of a pure...
Yeah, button mapping. We've basically lopped off a whole set of stuff, like you said, for crouching and other functions that normally you'd have to put in, but you don't have to think about it now, right?
I think exactly on that crouch subject, the first time that I actually tried a Rift, the guy who had set the project up was 6'5". And I'm 5'3", so I go in there and I'm way too high, and I was like, I can't duck down. I don't understand why am I so tall, and I was just like, it's not so good. And then you try room scale, it's I'm exactly my height. The floor is where it should be. This is what everybody needs.
Well, just to that point, I've been doing video games now for over 20 years, and the Vive is the first hardware platform that I've ever given a non-gamer, and they've intuitively known how to use it from the get-go, because it's such a natural extension of the way the human mind actually functions. So they use their hands as hands, and they walk around the room, and they do what they normally would do if this were actual reality, not virtual reality.
There's two good stories of people just picking it up and having no problem. Was my CTO, Devin, his wife was 8 months pregnant with twins and was able to play in the Vive, not being a gamer, just went in, no nausea, great experience. And then also his grandma, which I forget how old she was, but maybe late 70s.
Yeah.
It was amazing to hear about that experience. It's she had a lot of fun, and then came out and was I never thought I'd live to see VR like this. Sure. It's pretty intense.
When we've had some older people come in and play our game too, people that have never played a video game ever in their life, except for maybe Minesweeper, and they just take to it like water. It's just so natural for them.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say Devin Devin's wife pregnant with twins. And then when the twins came out, they were naturals at it too.
I think
The straps just don't get tight enough. That's the problem.
I think that'll be the big surprise in terms of what people expect the demographic to be, because it's the very young and the very old actually have a much easier time with the experience. Typically, from what we've seen, they just kind of pick it up because they expect it to just work that way because they have no kind of preconceived notion of what it should do.
Kids have no fear in VR. Like they sprint
Yeah, I know.
in VR.
That's been a problem.
They'll go balls to the wall. And we had a kid who was playing. He was playing Job Sim, and he was in the office, and the office was like the countertop was right at his eye level. And so it was really funny to see him like stand on his tippy toes to get into the donut box to go eat the donuts. He was just having so much fun. And
So one of the interesting things to me is when someone first comes down to join the VR team at Valve, and you can kind of go start working on whatever you want, they'll often be like, well, there's not enough buttons to map on all the things I want to do. And you just ignore them and say, no, just keep trying. And then eventually you'll find that they're actually using no buttons. And I know, Dirk, you guys have this great thing with your game where the shields become this I never forget where my shield is. Like, what was the process? And if you can explain about how that works, and then what was the process to kind of get there?
Yeah, so I'm just using like the trigger button to fire and then the touchpad to select your guns. But like the shield, I first tried like the side buttons, and then I was getting a feeling that some people accidentally hit it and it turned into a shield, so it's kind of unnatural. And so we started thinking about maybe we could like, if you would really have a shield, it would be on your back. So we tried like just trying to detect the controller on your back, and you could pull your shield out. So like you can swap yourself. Like within a second, you can take your shield and use it. So that was kind of experimenting with those controls. And I think like the more limitations you have, that also applies to room scale, the more creative you become, like, utilizing all those limitations. I think that's part of like the whole, this next few years, like being creative within those limitations.
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm glad the Steam controller has few buttons on it. Like when you look at the Hydra, it's confusion. And to try to tell someone, hey, hit the like southwest button that's kind of on the side or whatever, like I think the least amount of buttons that could be on the hardware encourage developers to want to simplify their interactions.
Well, and that's the problem with traditional developers, old dogs like me that have been around a long time. If there's a button there, I'm going to map something to it. And the problem there is, you get away from you're going away from the natural intuitiveness of the hardware. So I think it's actually good that we only have, on the Vive, we only have a handful of input mechanisms, because we really need to design around that and change our mindset away from mapping buttons to actions and think about, how do we interact with the world in a natural way? Like, for example, I think it's very good, the way the gallery works is for your backpack. You pull your backpack out and there it is. It's like magic. You pull that backpack out and there it is. You got all the things you can select, and it's just so natural. You don't have to map a button to it now.
Yeah, I mean, we had it mapped. At one time, it was, when we were doing Hydra, it was mapped to a button, right? But the higher the fidelity of the hardware is, the more you want to hinge on natural interactions and abstractions for that. So yeah, I think it's great that we have those constraints happening with the hardware, and you have, considering that somebody's blind essentially when they're in the gear, you have to figure out what is a natural, intuitive way to just do something, and the more real it is, tends to be the better answer.
We've also found it's really strange when you find something that feels natural that's actually supernatural, like grabbing objects from far away. So like that, like it feels more natural to like have telekinesis and grab an object from across the room, So that's like, what is it that's going on psychologically that's like, obviously nobody can do that in real life, but as soon as you have that ability, you just, as soon as you can do that in VR, you're just like, yeah, of course that's how it works, Like if I want to hop across the room, I'm gonna use the force to grab it, which is like another level of interaction that's beyond our normal.
It's also amazing how satisfying natural actions become in VR. Mm-hmm. Job Simulator, it doesn't get old throwing things at the job robot. Like, do it constantly when I'm in there.
Turns out, in reality, we just want to throw stuff.
Yeah.
That's really what we want.
Break bottles.
And psychologically, we're just unraveling the human psyche. You know?
Yeah, we took a page out of your book with a robot will like respond if you start throwing stuff, but we want ours to make you feel really bad. So if you start trashing the bar, the robot's like, oh, I just cleaned that. And, and then you leave and come back, it's all clean. He's like, I just cleaned it, please don't trash it again.
Yeah, doing things that are dangerous in real life in VR is really like this amazing thing that you want to try to exploit in VR experiences.
You can get a lot of ideas. Like if you just take ping pong, you could like add bombs or lasers with it, and it would become like much cooler ping pong. So you really have to expand the reality.
Step 1, make realism. Step 2, do whatever is next that we can't do.
Also, if I'm going back to the controllers, like first we're just thinking about just using the trigger because you couldn't see the touchpad. And then we just made like a model we could put on a model of the controller, so you actually would see the touchpad. And then it became natural to push the button as well. So we're using like the same control, the same model. So every feeling, everything you hold in your hand is just like this. You feel the senses, and the more senses that come to you at the same time, the more you're immersed into the game.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how quickly you take for granted being in VR and taking those controllers and putting them together and then feeling.
I still do that.
I still do it
It's
also,
been like a year almost, and I still do this.
The tracking accuracy is so good that you can actually see the faces made up, and you can feel them. And it's like, holy cow. It's like when Alex first handed us the controllers when we were at his place. It's like, grab the controllers. Holy cow, what just happened?
Yeah. Well, that's why I ask people to walk forward and grab the controllers from me rather than handing it to them.
Yeah.
Because they're like, well, if it first gets them over the hump of I can move in VR, and then 2, things actually align to where they are in the real world. And those 2 moments, like just giving them the controllers, they're already sold on everything that's happening.
Yes.
I didn't think one time, and I tossed it to somebody, and I wasn't thinking. I was just like tossed it, and he caught it, like only like 4 feet away, and he was like, what? Yeah. Like,
You know Chet's sitting right here, right?
That time you called them and said, hey, we got a controller that just magically broke one day.
Don't know what happened.
It's kind of the fascinating thing that makes VR so impactful, or having this kind of fidelity in the experience so impactful. Like I still do stupid shit. Like I'll put the controllers down on a virtual object when I'm totally engrossed in what I'm trying. Yeah. I'm concentrating on one thing happening in the experience, and I forget. I mean, I designed the fucking table, but I'm putting the controllers on a virtual table.
And you think usually you're in developer mode, so you just go in to test something real quick. So you almost haven't like sold yourself that you're really there, but you have. Exactly. So you're like, okay, I just got to go back and fix this bug. Let me just put this controller on this fake table.
Well, it's actually funny because as many times as I've gone into the VR environment, I still am enamored by the experience. Just putting on the headset is just like, wow, this never gets old. I just.
I actually stopped. I was one of the first backers of the DK1, and I was really wanted to create something for it, and I put it on and I played like for 10 minutes, and I was super sick. Like I had major motion sickness, and I stopped believing. I stopped programming. I stopped all of my projects in VR and started working on something else again. And then when Vive came out, I just tried it and I didn't feel sick at all. So that was for me like the main reason why I started believing in VR again. So this is it, like the tracking of the translations instead of just rotations, that did it for me. Like also the controllers. I can see like the controllers are one of the big major parts of VR in the future.
Well, and hitting 90, like there's something magical about hitting 90 frames a second that really brings the experience into, like, it doesn't matter how cartoony or stylized the experience is. It's
I fully agree.
Yeah, real.
Yeah, it would be nice to have that piece removed from the VR dialogue, the whole motion sickness part. Yeah. You know, if it just wasn't a thing that people brought up.
Well, but it takes designers making smart choices, like understanding what the key issues are. Sure. Like we know, we really do have a really good foundation in knowing what the common issues are. So just don't do that shit. Yeah. It really is that simple at this point.
But I'm sure like everyone here asks some people to come try a demo, and then they're like, I don't know, I get sick and that. And and that's really disappointing. Like that makes me really feel sad that people have a preconceived notion, and so try to dispel that by showing them new hardware that doesn't do that.
You only get one good chance at showing somebody their first VR experience. And if you blow that, they're very likely not to try it again.
Well, anyone who had a bad experience at one point in their life, they'll die off eventually and we'll have only good experiences. Let's refresh the whole pool of people.
So with it being so different and so new, like how do you guys start? Like what's your approach? Because people may not know this, so for GDC last year, we gave out kits to developers. Denny got one of the early ones, Patrick and Drew as well, and you got one of the latest rounds. So you didn't get the kit until late in January because you wanted to go do a game jam up in the north, in Canada.
An hour outside of Winnipeg.
Yeah, so like what was your approach to that? Because you were really, that was tight.
Yeah, I mean, the translation was, well, we were all remote, everybody at the company, and it was, can we pull off something like this? We need to get together on short notice, and we won't get the hardware until like 4 weeks before we need to show it to thousands of people. And no pressure. No pressure. And yeah, the approach was, thank God we can start off with a new design from the ground up, and I think that's the way you have to go with a new technology, like a room scale with track controllers. And so we just set that down as, okay, here are the constraints. What is the coolest thing that we think we can think up right now to do with this new tech? And so the first thing we did is we built a white table with 3 colored boxes and put them on the table and started building the ability to pick up physics objects and just worked on the hand interaction. And while testing that, we were sitting on the floor playing with blocks and stacking things and carrying them around like, oh, what if we did you're serving customers on a plate and you got to balance stuff, and we're thinking, okay, WarioWare mini games. We could do this physics-based mini games, and it's it slowly evolved into everything's a job, but you also want depth. You don't want 10 seconds of VR. In 10 seconds, you kind of barely get your surroundings. So let's go depth first and make a bunch of mini experiences, and that's how we arrived at what we were doing.
For us, obviously, hand interaction was key to the experience, and so we have the benefit of knowing what the Vive was and what it was capable of before we started our design process and so forth. And when we started working on Final Approach, it was like, how do we? Well, before we even conceived of Final Approach, actually, it was like, what game can we do that focuses, primarily on the hands and doing hand interactions? And I'm a pilot, so the natural thing for me was to think about airplanes, and so. I liked the idea of seeing these toy airplanes flying around in space, and I want to control them, and so I just grab them and give them a path to follow. And if you draw a path well enough, then it can follow it. If you draw some crazy path, then the plane will die trying to follow your crazy path. And I thought that could be a really fun kind of a concept, and so we just started building outwards from that. But what's really funny about that, though, is that and still to this day, we are learning what is fun in VR and what is not fun in VR. And so even though some of the original concepts we came up with are extremely fun, we've kind of stumbled along the way and just like, is this fun? No, let's cut it. Let's add some new things. And so right now what we have, I think, is genuinely fun. But it's been definitely a learning process because it's an entirely new paradigm that we're having to kind of operate in.
I like what Alex said about really just jumping into the Vive and making a table and then making 3 things and playing with them. Like I've always thought about approaching new hardware in particular with, there's kind of like 2 approaches to it I've always thought of. One is it's like this direct, naive approach. It's like when people were making cell phone games for the first iPhone, and they wanted to make like Sonic the Hedgehog, and so they put 3 buttons and a D-pad. And it's like, yeah, that works, but that's not what the technology is good at. And it wasn't until like Fireproof made the room that was like, it was taking what the technology gave you and then making an experience for that specifically, that like the shining examples came out. And so translating that exactly to VR, it's more about, well, just get in VR and then just kind of like explore and see what the controllers allow and like what, specifically with the Vive, what walking around allows, and then find an experience that accentuates those features.
Well, I think you hit on something, which is that no matter how long you spend doing this stuff, I think we still don't value our on paper or in thought design process at all. We constantly say, oh, this is going to be a great idea, but then we force ourselves to say, we have to try it and prototype it as quick as possible. Yeah. So that leads to like the fastest iteration cycle possible is the best development style for VR.
Yep.
And I just don't think we'll ever get to the point where we can write out a GDD for a great VR game, ever. Even with 10, 15 years of experience, you just have to try it. Well, people think you're just completely batshit insane when you describe VR. Like to the point of like dragging you out to be committed. You're like, there was a whale in my living room and I ate a donut and it was great and I painted in the place.
Once I started describing it to people as the first generation holodeck is when it started resonating with people. Like this, we're establishing the rules for the first holodeck. People get that culturally, you know?
One of the things on that topic is I think the importance of game jams, because obviously we're a studio that was born out of a game jam. And a game jam is a 48-hour exercise in congealing your idea into a playable demo. And it's super fast-paced, a super quick turn, and it will either quickly validate or invalidate your idea. And I think those are really good tools, and I would definitely say anybody who is thinking about getting into VR, you know, even if you're not participating in, say, a formal game jam, but at least go through that motion of taking your idea and not working on killer art and killer sound and everything that you would see in a final demo, but like Alex did, take some simple concept and just throw it together in Unity or whatever and see what you can crank out in a short amount of time and see if it's fun. If it's not fun, nothing else matters.
I really feel like we've been 12 months into a game jam. Like that's what the entire development process of Job Simulator has been. Yeah, you're OG with the game jam. It's 3 years now.
Yeah, I feel like our design process was kind of, it made us feel sort of like crazy people because we didn't have the hardware. It was basically, you know, Vive is announced, 20 minutes later, we're like, what do we have? A room? Okay, let's attach engines to it, it flies. And we've got controllers, guns, let's do it. That was pretty much the entire design of the entire game. And then all the details obviously came later, like physical reloading and like adding cover and like, oh, you just have to really duck. But the initial like flying room, guns, let's go. And like, it's funny because there's actually a video of us from like probably that first week where we described exactly what we wanted the game to be. We're like, and we're gonna pop around cover and we're gonna shoot and we're gonna fly on the same ship. And then we paired that with video that we just shot a couple weeks ago, and it's like exactly what we described.
It's brilliant, by the way. Your solution is great. It's a really good introduction to room scale VR.
Awesome. And a lot of it was we were just imagining like if we had unlimited money, what would the coolest like airsoft or laser tag or paintball gunfight be, and it would involve ships that fly, you know? And so like that's like the design, like if you have all the money and magic powers in the world, what do you make happen?
For me, it was also like one big experiment. I just got HTC Vive lately in September or October last year. I was working on another game and tried the blue demo and just dropped everything, every project, and I started working for 3 weeks on a shooter because I didn't have any shooter demo. So I started experimenting, like, what would this ideal shooter be like? I want to have laser guns, but because that doesn't exist, I want to do some dodging, like Matrix-style dodging. So I tried to implement all those things, and it wasn't graphically like awesome looking. But yeah, you got the core mechanics. I was just experimenting with all those things, and then get to a different level just by experimenting with the gameplay. Just has to feel super right.
You guys are cutting me deeply because we have the misfortune of Final Approach was pretty much our first concept, and so we have so many other ideas that we want to try, but we're focused on finishing Final Approach. And
that is the pain of
my God.
Everyone's got that.
It's like, holy cap.
Everyone's got their bucket list.
Does everyone have a leather-bound book with all the ideas?
Hey, what if we did
tearing pages out
every day?
Yeah.
I did the math on the production of all the ideas that we have, and like with our current staff and the current amount of time we spent, it would take us 280 years to complete all of the ideas that we want to do. So we got to be pretty choosy.
That's funny. I also wonder if anyone could ever dig up the data on how many people quit their jobs to do VR. Yeah.
After the day after we left Alex's house, having fed him a copious amount of barbecue, I started the process of shutting down the company that I was operating and had been running for 3 years. And so I knew this is where we were going. I wanted to be, part of it. And so Mike Dauber, my partner, obviously had similar feelings. So yeah, I mean, that was the holy crap moment that we just like stop whatever you're doing, focus on this, and create something awesome.
Usually in tech, you talk about job creation. This is like how many jobs were just nuked right at the moment.
Ergo, the need for Job Simulator 50 years from now.
It's more true than you know.
I have a question for the table. How long do you guys think it'll take us to kind of find a parity or a common design language for VR? How, like in terms of the industry, getting its heads around where VR is going to go. How long do you think that'll take?
I hope it takes like 20, 30 years because that will mean that we're being creative for 30 years. I think once there are like guidelines, then get less creative.
Well, isn't it going to change significantly at every major goalpost? Like once we no longer have, like if we're doing optical hand tracking or something, like, oh, now everything's slightly different in how we deal with highlight states and interactions and how we reach out and grab. And like, I guess there's going to be a lot of shared things of what not to do. I feel like we just are building a list of things not to do, not a list of things that we should do.
That's a good point. I think the same thing, what you said, is the more constraints we put on the developer, the more corralled you're going to feel from a design standpoint, and we really don't want that. We want, it's the beauty of right now is, we're at the dawn of this entire new genre, and so we want to keep it very wild, wild west at the moment, even though some of the experiences coming out of this are going to be maybe less compelling or maybe a bit uncomfortable, but there's going to be some gems in there. If we look, we can see what other people are doing and say there's tidbits there that we can use, and that's good. Those are good things that we can extract, and the longer that we can promote that kind of thing within our own organizations, I think that's going to be very, very beneficial.
We had known it was fun to watch people play games, but like we do this thing called the International, which is watching people play games, but you're really watching the game, not the player, right? The player's kind of tangential to that. But when you guys started doing this tilt brush stuff where you were actually showing the person doing it, we'd always kind of put those people in a closed room and away from everything. And just watching that, and I've always joked that tilt brush to me looks like drunks painting the sky. Because you're always like, what are you doing? Yeah. Right? But it's like, it ends up being, it's super fascinating to watch play. And Dirk, for years, that was one of the things that when we were trying to evaluate experiences for this event, was just watching each other play that game in the weird, twisted places. Now that you guys know that people do that, is that something you're gonna look at capitalizing on? Or is there gonna be the pretzel game where or some kind of weird twister?
That's funny. We got lucky on that. We wanted to do an art show. We wanted to do a VR art show where we had a bunch of pieces of work, and you would come in and you would put on a headset and it would be in front of you. We had this idea of there's an empty frame sitting in front of you, and you put on the headset and then the frame is filled with something. And so we did that, and then we're like, well, we've got this Vive, let's just put it on stage and then project what they're seeing over them, and that will be like, the center, and like it'll give people an understanding of how everything was built. But there were 4 rows of chairs set up filled with people. And then they would clap when the artist took off the headset. Like, it was overwhelming at how much of a performance it became. And so, we will absolutely keep doing that.
Yeah. We have like VR parties that form out of our playtesting that people just congregate around. As long as you've got the game view like projected on either a large TV or projector, just a whole natural group of people form, and there's cheering for when someone solves a puzzle and fantastic contraption. There's applause when someone draws something amazing. You get a real artist to come in, and they're like, I just remember our living room with people just sitting around like drinking beer or wine and like watching someone paint. It's just this really weird paradigm. I've never felt that feeling like in my living room.
2 things to dispel in VR: motion sickness, and it's not a social experience, because that's total horseshit. It is a social experience. It's actually more engaging than most video games in that sense, or experiences. And I can't wait to see all the developers kind of exploiting that aspect of it.
We're still waiting to see what sort of social gameplay comes out of our game. But one thing that is kind of funny right now is we don't have a running total, but seems like 9 out of 10 people when they're pathing the airplanes, they talk to the airplanes like they're actual characters. So, come on, little guy, come on, let's go. Come on, you right down there. Good job. It's kind of bizarre, really, but yeah, almost everybody does it, and.
That's cute. Yeah. In my game, they're swearing all of the time.
Cooperative play in VR is going to be a huge thing, I think. It's because it's really just kind of channeling your childhood, playing fantasy games with your friend in a really literal way. I mean, you guys are already doing it.
Yeah, we instantly, we didn't even consider single player right initially. It was just like, we want 2 people at least in there together shooting at each other. That's like the craziest thing that we can think of, like socially, and then just
well, and health benefits.
Right for it.
Like I was telling you earlier, like we play hover junkers and we work up a sweat. Like VR has a massive health beneficial market, ahead.
Back to what you were saying about the when you were kids though, when you were playing with toys. So that's one of the things we decided initially was we were going to play with scale, and not every game does this, obviously, but we thought it would be really fun to have the entire world that we're dealing with, be something like the size of your coffee table or your dining room table. Yeah, and so we were playing with all these toy airplanes, and it changes the way you think about all of the characters and objects in the game as being toys, sort of like when you were kids. But then we have zoom points where you zoom in, and now you're inside that world. It is a pretty dramatic thing to have the player experience both the zoomed in and the zoomed out aspects of the game.
It's like imagination. It's like a cross between imagination and a shared dream.
Yes.
Like it's really a shared dream.
All the creativity and imagination you lost as a kid, VR gives it back.
Totally. Yeah. You're a jaded adult, but you can still go back there very easily.
If we have our game muted and people start firing the guns, they'll make the noises and they don't even realize it. Just be like bang, 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 and you're just like, oh, this has got to turn the sound on.
Well, and for our game, it's if you calibrate the room to a seated experience, we dynamically scale the environment to fit whatever your environment is, and it is a completely different game to be able to sit in a chair, and the entire airport area that you're playing with is like this big, and you can reach and just draw, just sit comfortably in your chair and just like, hey, you go over here, you go over here, it is very much like when I was a kid, have my little toy play sets and fly my airplanes around. It's exactly like that, and it's so much fun though.
I love the psychological strangeness that you notice when you're watching people play, like they make the sound of the gun for you, or they're talking to people in the plane. I just want to just bring that up as a topic, just like what is the funniest things you've seen people do while playing games? But because I had one in mind, which is everyone opens their mouth when they're eating in Job Simulator. Everyone. And so they've got this donut and and you're watching them play and you can't even hear the audio, which is even better. So you just see someone in the distance going.
Actually, the funniest thing for me was on Job Simulator was when I dropped something on the floor, I ducked under the counter to get it and pick it up. Yeah. Even though I knew I wasn't going to hit my head on the counter. I avoided the physical object because I didn't want to hit my head on the counter. So.
Yeah, spatial avoidance is the thing we see most often. Just people, anticipating and not wanting to clip through geo or anything like that. It's just there's this compulsion not to do those things.
We had someone draw a huge thing in Tilt Brush, and then they were right up at the bounds, and they were skirting themselves around the drawing to try to get to the other side because they're like, oh, I can't go through the middle. And then it's hilarious for everyone in the room who's watching them. It's a big open space, and they're just kind of but you can't push yourself.
We see that all the time. When we were building the GDC demo at Valve, Christine tried out one of our demos, and she drew this awesome fire horse. And she drew one side of it, and she wanted to go paint the other side, and she crawled underneath the horse. It was an awesome validation of it, I guess.
We've seen people will respond to what they think a physical property is going to be differently than another one. So anything that's really spiky, they'll avoid. But if you make a pillow, they're totally okay with walking through it. So we kind of use that to sort of shuffle people around to specific places on the ship, especially on the floor. So the center point where we want them to stand is very flat and usually wood. And then beyond that will be a metal grate. and they're less likely to step onto the metal grate. And then if there's spiky things, they'll avoid the spiky things.
The spatial awareness, you're there, and like in my game, the droids are coming from everywhere. So I was thinking, like, what's the best way to let the player know that it's right behind you or something? And then we also noticed that everyone will be playing with headphones, so we could make use of spatial audio as well. And just with that audio and the right sounds, everybody was just looking in the right direction. So that made a huge difference in our game. And also the second one is, like, we had all the senses except for like your nose, like even the gun was rumbling. But if you got hit by a bullet, there was like no feedback. It was just like the screen shaking. So that's still something, in my opinion, that's pretty difficult. You can't get any feedback for the player. You can add sounds, but there's no one punching you. There's no bullets penetrating you. So that's a bit of a weird thing that needs to be like researched. What's the best way to get people to know that they're hit?
HMD haptics.
Yeah. HMD haptics.
Yeah. For us, I think probably the most challenging aspect of designing the game was the scale. So we have an environment that the user needs to be able to move around fully, yet different users have different dimensions that they can actually play in. They have coffee tables here or desks there, and so their space may be smaller or larger. And so our ultimate solution, of course, was to dynamically scale when we're what we call God mode. In other words, when the world is small and everything's toys, we dynamically scale that to fit the available play space. And then when we zoom in, we've designed all those experiences to be more or less stationary. So you don't have to wander around too much when you're actually zoomed into the world. So everything is reachable or you can interact with it from more or less a stationary position. So that keeps everything, you can still move around in the environment when you're in God mode, but then in stationary mode, you can still play it also.
One of the really interesting challenges with room scale is that when the user has that freedom to walk around anywhere within that volume, they can cheat. They can walk through a wall. They can take a peek into the next room, whatever, right? So coming up with a system that allowed us to kind of blur out and then reset the user to like a known safe place that we can put them, that was a huge challenge because we had all kinds of crazy ideas like, well, if they walk through Geo, maybe we could put up like a doorway that tells them, no, you got to walk back this way. But ultimately, it just came down to like resetting them to a known commodity. Lots of weird shit that you would never normally have to think about in game design.
Well, I think all these pain points are like how to make it for the user, make it a good experience. But like on the development side, it's so primitive to have to try to create a room scale game. Like you realize when you're building, like doing level design, how bad a representation of a 2D screen version of what you're looking at really is. You build something you think is going to look good for a room and an object and a prop you think it's to scale. And then you go into VR and you just laugh at how poor your estimates were based on what you thought in the scene view in Unity or whatever. And so we got to the point where the iteration cycle of this thing's too high and this thing's too big and I need to move that around was a two-man job. So we'd have one person in the editor in Unity and then someone standing in VR, and he'd basically be like the forklift driver, like director, and be like, yeah, 2 feet to the right, yeah, bring it down. And we were like adjusting heights and scaling things, and we would do it live. Yeah. And then we would just save all the data and all the changes that we had made. So we have a long way to go when it comes to actual content creation tools.
Can we talk about that for a second? Just the phenomenal brain, I won't say the word, but it just, when you can edit in scene, real time, like in Unity, it's very typical, like you can go into the scene and play with scale and position things while you have somebody testing. Like what a mind fuck that.
Actually, I did do some experimentation with that. So early on, I just built some object controls in Unity that would, if you select an object in space, it would actually put little controls on it, so you could scale, stretch, copy, move, etc. And it was so intuitive, and it worked very, very well. But we have not been able to. I haven't had the time, obviously, given our constraints, to be able to kind of take that into the next step and sort of solidify those tools. But it would be super nice in the editors that we have to be able to work in VR when you're designing in VR.
Drew and I play that exact same game with Tilt Brush, where I put on the headset and he tweaks shaders, and it's my favorite game. I love it so much.
The guy in VR's got the much better job.
Yeah, for sure.
Except when you're scaring somebody, like Chris, one of our programmers, dropped a giant albino alligator behind me in a level I wasn't expecting. I turned around and just screamed because I wasn't expecting it.
So yeah, I mean, we did that with we had knives in the kitchen way back in the first version, and I was in the scene view and someone was in VR, and I lifted using the scene tool, I lifted it up, and then he's standing over here, and then I pointed it toward his, I rotated it toward his face, and he's like, and I started moving it toward him, and it was I had crossed the line. It was clear that was not okay, and I just didn't know. There are a couple things you try in VR, and then people get really freaked out, and then you go, I'm never doing that again. And one is making a knife fly toward their face in VR.
So have you guys all moved to VR then forever?
Oh yeah, I can't I bought GTA, the last one that came out, and I'm a huge GTA fan, but I can't play it anymore. All video games have been neutered for me because I need that direct experience. I need to be inside the experience now. Doesn't matter how much polish there is on a AAA title. I can't be in it now because I know what the potential is. I know how much further they could have pushed it,
It's funny. I think I still fall back on even 2D games. There are still some old content that I need. It satisfies that itch. For development, yeah, for sure.
I feel like I'm playing baby games though now. When I'm playing a game on my cell phone or whatever, I'm just I'm a baby. This is not.
The creation process is totally different. When I create 2D games, you feel you're seeing your character coming to life. But now, when you're creating this droid that I created, it's really alive. It's floating right before you, 1 meter away. So it's crazy. It's it's there. It lives. It's actually there. And I didn't have that same feeling with 2D or 3D games before.
Well, nobody at our studio has a background in the game industry at all. All of our backgrounds are VFX, animation, video. And, interactive entertainment was interesting. And then we saw VR and we're forget all of that. Entertainment's about to change incredibly. So
I feel like developers, they walk out of VR and they're okay, I have 10 ideas I instantly want to make right now.
Yes.
And usually with new tech, something you'd see at CES, you have to really pitch people hard on why this new form factor, why a phone before phones were ubiquitous. How's that going to change your life? How's that going to be a thing? But in VR, after you step out, it's actually the reverse. Mm-hmm. The player is this will change everything, medicine and technology, and oh my God. Usually the flow doesn't go that way. You usually have to pitch pretty hard to tell people why this is going to be good.
The worst thing is trying to explain it to someone who's not tried it though, because you can't show them a screenshot and make them understand. And you can't show them a video and say, this is what it is. Nope, sorry. You got to put the headset on and you got to step in, or else you're not going to get it.
It's the biggest marketing issue.
Problem.
That's been one of the things that we've been focusing on the most because we'll release a trailer on YouTube and we'll get a lot of comments from people who just do not understand it at all, and they're just make it a regular game. And then I'll respond how would you reload? You have to physically flick the controller. And they're you press the R button and it plays an animation, duh. And then we put the camera on the front of the headset, so it's okay, you can see that your hand is actually physically doing this action, instantly clicks. And they're okay, I need to get money. I gotta figure out how to buy a computer and set this up right now.
I think what you guys are doing with 3 cameras, you got one facing out, you got the feed, you've got outside. You need as much data about what's actually happening as possible, so you could overlay it and figure it out. And what the Northway team is doing with mixed reality, showing here's kind of what it feels like for me to be inside of VR from the outside. Yeah. So you're getting that I'm reaching for a thing, and I don't know. I feel like that's one of the best ways to show people how spatially VR makes you feel like you're there versus you're seeing some screen of something else.
So Chet, can I overstep and ask what Valve's plans are to kind of express this to the public?
What do you mean?
Well, what VR is, it's very hard to get across in a video we're discussing, right? So what is your strategy other than giving people the experience?
We give smart people the equipment, and we pretty much put no limits on how they share it, use it, do it. And it's we've been proven that's a good strategy, as you guys have done some crazy stuff.
I think it's going to be, the more that we look at it, I think it's going to be more word of mouth and viral, like, oh, these people are playing this and they're really into it. A lot of people think it might be silly at first, but then somebody that they respect is playing it, and then they get to try it at their friend's house, and they're like, I gotta get this.
It'll be exponential growth because of that.
Well, so some of the first YouTube videos, when I was right after we first started looking into this, started like Googling or YouTubing, searching for Vive videos, and there were no actual Vive videos. It was all people that had just come out of the experience saying, "Oh my God, that was the greatest thing ever," and so that's really the only thing you can do, honestly. That even now, that's still the best way to describe it to somebody is just to give them their O face,
Also, if you see someone playing it like in our game, you really have to move around. And my dad, he's 67, he was rolling all over the floor and shooting lasers. Yeah. Just if you see someone doing that, you really need to try it yourself.
Well, thanks you guys for all coming out, and I can't wait till these are all released.